All right, so last week we talked about trusting God with our money. And the idea was that when we trust God with our money, God will give us direction. In return, we will be able to make better financial decisions. And through the process, God will provide His favor for us so that we could advance in our financial situation. So last week's Sunday school is going to tie into this week's Sunday school. This week's Sunday school is titled Becoming a Blessing, the True Purpose for Financial Increase. Genesis 12, 2 through 3.
I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed.
So what we can understand by this scripture is that God's blessing promises provision, it promises promotion, and it promises protection. Genesis 12:2 says, I will bless you. God will provide everything that we need to grow and increase in our finances. And sometimes this may feel, we talked about this in our Bible study on Friday, about sometimes our situations can get a little desperate. And we can feel like, no, God's not going to provide for me, or I'm not going to get breakthrough. But sometimes it's through those desperate situations that God is able to move. If we have a desperate financial situation, this is an opportunity for us to invite God into our situation and see His provision for our lives. I remember being in that situation where your financial situation would not change. Everything that you would do, or I would do, would not change my financial situation. Ask somebody for a job, they would say, no, doors are closing. But later what I realized is those doors were closing because the right door was going to be opened. I remember going and asking a produce company, hey, will you hire me? Give me a job. I'll do anything. And they told me, no, you don't have the skills. But you know what? We have some pallets of tomatoes that have some good ones in them and some bad ones in them. I'll let you run those tomatoes. You get the good ones out, and if you want, go and sell them. And so for me, I was so desperate that I said, okay, I'll do it. I'll do anything. It's really crazy. That produce company that denied me a job and told me, go run tomatoes, is one of our customers today. They rely on us to source them their avocados. But see, at the time, it was desperate. I thought that God was closing doors, that God was not going to move for me. He was not going to provide for me. But God helped me. It changed my perspective on how I viewed things. Selling produce off the back of my truck wasn't a bad thing. It was a good thing. It changed how I thought about opportunity. The second thing is promotion. Genesis 12:2 says, I will make your name great. When we come into our church, many times there's nothing great about us. Some of you all maybe yes, but speaking for myself, and there's nothing great about our financial situation. See, it was God that gave me an open door for selling off the back of my truck, and then giving me an opportunity in a job as a salesman, and going into that workplace, being completely ignorant on how to work and how to use a computer. I remember my boss told me, download Instant Messenger because that's how we communicate here in the office. I had never heard what Instant Messenger was. And after a week, he gets after me and he tells me, how come you haven't downloaded Instant Messenger? I was like, I don't even know what that is. And I go into that company is just selling a few loads of produce a week. And in 6 months, we're selling 15 loads of produce. And in 1 year, I was offered an opportunity as a director for a new company. This was God. This was God promoting me, and that's what His word says. The third thing is protection. Genesis 12:3 says, I will bless those that bless you, and I will curse those that curse you. Genesis 15:1, don't be afraid. I am your shield and an exceeding great reward. Proverbs 10:22, the blessing of the Lord makes one rich, and He adds no sorrow to it. Excuse me. So as we navigate through our financial journey, this should be our confidence. God, you are going to provide, promote, and protect. But the question this morning is, why? Why does God promise this? And why is God going to do this in our life? You know, when I had the idea of opening or owning our own business, I was at church. We were on the stage at that time. You know, we're talking about this at Bible study. At that time, they would allow people that didn't know how to play instruments to actually get up there and practice. And I was one of them. We're standing up there, we're practicing. They're trying to teach new people. And God just gives me this idea. What if I give you a business so that you could be a part of world evangelism? God was putting a purpose into my mind of what I was going to be able to do with the blessing that he was going to give me. As we've been doing our Sunday school, we've been talking about the Total Money Makeover and how the Total Money Makeover can be a good process or steps that can help us to be effective along our financial journey. And we've covered all of them, but I want to show the slide. Go ahead and show that slide again. The 7 baby steps. So we covered all of these: save $1,000 for emergency, take care of your debt, eventually grow your emergency fund to 3 to 6 months of expenses, begin investing for retirement and for college, eventually get to the point to pay off your house. But then number 7 is build wealth and give. And so that's what we build up to. All these good decisions, this good stewardship, God blessing and giving us favor builds up to being able to continue to multiply resource and give. Thank you. In the book, The Total Money Makeover, when you get to that point where they start talking about baby step number 7, Dave Ramsey breaks it down to this. He says, the reality is that you can only do 3 things with money. And the first thing is enjoy it. How many of you guys like that one? I said, I'm going to use that one first because I want some excitement. There's only 3 things you can do with money. The first thing is enjoy it. That means spend money on ourselves and on our family. You see, serving God isn't all about just business with God, business with money. God doesn't mind us to have nice things. God doesn't mind us to take a vacation, to bless our families. Ecclesiastes 5:19 says, as for every man whom God has given riches and wealth, given him power to eat of it, to receive his heritage, and to rejoice in his labor. This is a gift from God. We should be able to enjoy our blessing. The other thing is to multiply. This is investing. Ecclesiastes 11:1 says, send your grain across the sea, and in its time, profits will flow back to you. That money has the way to reproduce itself. And this is what we see in the parable of the talents, right? Those that were good with money had more opportunity, were given more. Money has the ability to reproduce itself many times with little effort. The third thing is give it away. Dave Ramsey says this: wealth is not an escape mechanism, it is a tremendous responsibility. Money is not going to solve all of life's problems. And I know we've been talking about it for 3 straight months now. Money is not the most important thing, but it is a responsibility that God gives us. If we don't have a purpose for our money, there's a few things that will happen. We will begin to believe that money is the answer to all problems. And we will be let down when we find out that's not true. Or we will become vulnerable to waste and mismanagement because we don't have a purpose. And in the book, Dave asked the question, why? Why would you contend to get out of debt, build an emergency fund, eventually put yourself in the position where you can manage wealth? What is the purpose? Is it just to live abundantly? Is it just to retire early? Is it to travel the world? Can I be honest? That's exactly what I thought. You know, one of my goals is I want to retire when I'm 40. That was what I would say. And I thought that was so noble, that was something that was that I should be so excited about. But the reality is, honestly, I had the wrong perspective. In the Christian life, you never retire. And when I found out about that, I was depressed. I was like, no way, I'm not going to be able to retire and, do like those people. Becoming a blessing is understanding the true purpose of financial growth. And so, if we want to know God's true purpose for financial growth, we have to know God. God is about people. And the true purpose of financial growth or becoming a blessing is to help others. Genesis 12:2 says, God tells us in Genesis 12:2 why and the purpose. He says, I will bless you and you shall be a blessing. And in you, all the families of the earth shall be blessed. The word shall translate into will. In other words, God is giving us a commandment, or he's commanding us to bless others. And this is the true purpose. Pastor Greg Mitchell, in this past men's class that we just went to on Monday, he said this: God's plans are always to make our lives larger. Why? Because he wants us to help and impact others. God's saying, I'm going to bless you, but that blessing is linked to other people. And the reality is that God takes this serious. Proverbs 28:27.
Whoever gives to the poor will lack nothing, but those who close their eyes to them receive many curses.
I thought that was really interesting because I had never connected being cursed with not helping somebody in need, not giving to the poor. And this scripture is clear that God tells us that he's going to bless us when we meet other people's needs. Ignoring them will result in a negative result. Most people limit their financial potential because they can't see past their own needs. Proverbs 19:17.
He who has the pity on the poor lends to the Lord, and he will pay back what he has given.
My translation says, whoever is kind to the poor lends to the Lord, and he will reward them for what they have done. God sees helping others as lending directly to him, and he promises us that he will repay us. I found a small video on the action, a visual of the action of somebody seeing somebody in need. Really interesting story. Somebody sees somebody in need, helps them, and immediately they're repaid. Go ahead and show that video.
Excuse me, ma'am. Sorry to bother you. I'm just trying to ask people for $1 to get the bus out of here. I don't know if you have anything, but I hate to bother you.
No problem.
Are you sure?
Positive.
It's not gonna hurt you?
No. It'll help you more than it'll hurt me.
Thank you.
$2.
What's
Thank
your
you.
name?
Lulu.
Oh, I'm Jimmy. Good to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Jimmy.
Why'd you help me out?
Because anytime you need help, if I have it, I can, I will. You have a
Yes.
wonderful day.
Yes, thank you. Lulu.
You say, what was your name?
Jimmy.
Jimmy. Nice
Yeah.
to meet you, Jimmy.
Here, Lulu. Take this. Lulu,
But you just asked for it.
I want to bless you with $1,000 for being so kind to
No,
help
you
me.
don't. That's not true.
Yes, thank you.
Are you serious?
Yes.
Are you sure? That's
Yes.
a lot of money. I got 5 kids. I'm going through a lot. Not having a job. It's hard to maintain everyday life.
The hardest part about getting a job.
The smile.
Really?
Have the smile.
Here's a lady that is challenged with an opportunity or a need for somebody else. After you hear her story, you realize she didn't have all the resources just to give money away. But she knew somebody was in need. She saw somebody that was maybe in a worse position than she was. And she said, you know what? I'm willing to do that. The guy asked her for $1 and she gives him $2. And then it was just a test. That guy ended up blessing her with $1,000. Matthew 25:40 says, "Inasmuch as you did these for the let me start it again. Matthew 25:40. Inasmuch as you did it to one of the least of these, my brother, you did it to me." And so this is what God is saying, is that when we take these opportunities to help others, He is going to bless us. So who should we help? A lot of times we will see a need and we won't know, should I help them? Can I help them? Well, sometimes it's family. In our budget, my wife and I have placed in there for years family and people that we can help along the way. Through our business, our families, some of our family has worked for us sometimes in their most difficult time. You know, my brother Art, he was going through a divorce and he ended up working for us, and he ended up changing his profession. And through that time, he was able to go to school. And he just texted me just yesterday that they just made him a director for this big dialysis company in Dallas. And I was, I'm doing the study, and I was remembering the time where he was in a tough spot, and we had the opportunity to work with his schedule and help him go to school. The same thing for my sister. And so sometimes it'll be family, but sometimes it'll be complete strangers. Galatians 6:10.
Therefore, as we have the opportunity, let us do good to all, especially to those who are of the household of faith.
Sometimes we'll see the needs inside our house, inside God's house. That's brothers and sisters that we know that could use some help, but most of the time it is God's house that we can be liberal to, that we can give to, and we can help. You know, a few Sunday schools ago, Pastor Brandon shared a testimony about, we had a conversation, it caused him to believe God for some resources. He goes to the mailbox, there's the money that he was believing God for. But somebody was hearing our Sunday school, and that person said, if Pastor Brandon can believe God for money, I'm going to believe God for money as well. And they prayed, they said, God, you know our need, you know that it is legitimate, we need your help, and we need you to move for us. And they said that same day, somebody went to them and blessed them with a significant amount of money. And so that story is not only just a testimony of somebody's faith and believing God for supernatural resource, but somebody that saw their need and said, hey, you know what? I don't need to be prompted to give. I can see somebody's need and I can bless them. They had the right perspective on the purpose of their blessing. Now, we'll say this, becoming a blessing does require a balance. You know, sometimes I'll get asked, hey, if I'm short on my budget, if I'm in debt, if I have other responsibilities, should I be helping people? Well, if God tells you to do it, yes, you should, because that's going to create an opportunity for God to bless you. But it's going to be very hard for you to be responsible and get out of debt if you're putting other people's needs at the priority. In other words, if you can't afford it, God is not asking us to be irresponsible and say, hey, you don't have to be responsible with your personal needs because you're helping people. That's not the idea. The idea is being responsible, and as we become better stewards, we have a better balance on how to help people. The second thing is responding to crisis. Genesis 14 through 16. What do you got? Okay, I'll just read it. It said, when Abraham heard that his brother had been taken captive, he armed his 318 trained servants who were born in his house and went and pursued them as far as Dan. He divided his forces against them by night, and he and his servants attacked them and pursued them as far as Hobah. which is north of Damascus. So he brought back all the goods and also brought back his brother Lot and his goods, as well as the women and the people. And so here's a story of Abraham hearing of a time of crisis and Abraham responding to the need. Now, he could have looked at this opportunity, or he could have took the opportunity to say, you know what? What are they doing over there? Or maybe they shouldn't have been in that position where they would get into trouble. But the reality is that Abraham used what he had to respond in a time of crisis, because he was a man who prepared and he was a good steward. The scripture says that he armed his 318 trained servants. So now, not only has God given Abraham resources, right? Genesis 13:2 says that Abraham was very rich. So not only was he wealthy, but he had power also. He had 318 servants that were born in his house. And if you just do a little back study of the time that this is happening, it was like Abraham had a small military in his house. God was making him powerful. God was helping him to prepare for a time of crisis. And so if we're going to be able to respond with our blessing, with our resources in times of crisis, we're going to have to prepare as well. Properly managing the blessing is us thinking about possible future needs. You know, a while back, Pastor Andy Anderson was here. He's preaching the revival, and he preached an awesome sermon on the war chest. And this was the perspective that those that are financially successful, they think about the future. They're planning, they're organizing, they're setting money aside to be able to be a blessing, to be able to help others, and to be able to have resources to fight in times of need. And this is what giving to world evangelism does. It's us putting money aside, putting it into our churches internationally so they can go out and help others that can't help themselves. The other thing Abraham did is he acted without hesitation. You know, the other day we're driving around and we get to a stoplight and my wife says, "Oh man, babe, you have any money?" And I'm like, "Oh." I'm like, "Yeah." And she's like, "Poor guy, I'm gonna help this guy or whatever." And I'm like, "Yeah, okay, whatever." You know, my default of my mind is analytical. I look at something and I want to analyze it. But when you're giving, a lot of times acting without hesitation is what's going to help you to stay sensitive to God. You know, my wife looks at a need and she just like, okay, just give it. Don't think about it. Don't try to overqualify it. Proverbs 3:27-28.
Do not withhold good from those whom is due, when it is in your power to act. Do not say to your neighbor, "Come back tomorrow and I will give it to you," when you already have it in with you.
Yeah, so what the scripture is telling us is that if somebody asks you for something and you're able to do it, do it. But sometimes we can overthink, we can try to overqualify the people that are in need of help. Like I said, I sat there and I looked at that guy that my wife was giving money to, and I'm like, she probably just gave him money to buy a beer, you know? But the reality is that they need help, and it's up to us to help them if we can. And so this is the mentality of building a case around people that need help. So I have another little video here, if y'all can show that.
A homeless man comes up to me, this time he said, "Can I have $1?" And I said, "I'm sorry, I can't give you money." And again, I was judging, "But I can get you whatever you want from whatever you want to eat." He said, "No, I just really want $1." I said, "Sorry, I can't give you money." And he saw that I wasn't going to give him anything, so he went to the next table. The next table was another homeless man. The first homeless man asked the other homeless man, "Can I?" You know what he did? Without thinking, he gave him $1. I said, "God forgive me. God forgive me. I was judging him. Another homeless man gave him $1, and I didn't give him $1. Sometimes I get asked that, well, should we give money to homeless people? And oftentimes we don't want, yes, we judge, and maybe that person is doing drugs. But then I started thinking, like, well, how many times has God given me money and I used it for the wrong? Every day, right? How many things have we bought that we wasted, right? We waste money all the time. But does God still give me money? Yes, He still gives me money. Even things that I've used it in the wrong or I've wasted, yes, He still gives me. Who am I to say no? And then what if by me giving him $1, maybe that saved him from doing something really bad? Like doing something bad to get $1, right? So don't judge. Don't judge anyone. And how you want God to deal with you, deal with others. A homeless man comes up.
Yeah, so here's this man saying that he judged, or he tried to overqualify somebody that is in need. And so last week I was talking to Pastor Brian about, the Sunday school, and, he's telling me, about a story that he had. He said that he walked into a supermarket. It was that day, actually, when we were talking on Thursday. And he said he walked into a supermarket, and he's buying some stuff that he needs for his home. And a man comes up to him with a bag of rice. And he tells him, "Can you buy this rice for me?" And he says immediately his response was, "Oh, this guy's probably on drugs, or this guy's an alcoholic, or this guy's irresponsible." He says that was his immediate response. That's what he wanted to say. He wanted to say no because I have the right to say no because you're responsible for your situation. He said, but he remembered watching Pastor Greg's Sunday school, Kingdom Prosperity. And he remembered that in that Sunday school, Pastor Greg said that somebody showed up to the church and they asked him for $60. And he was with somebody, and he told the guy that asked him for the money, he says, "Okay, go to your car and I'll let you know right now if I'm going to give it to you." And he turns to the person that he's with and he says, "What do you think? Should we give him the money? Should we help this guy?" And the person that he's with said, "Nah, he's probably going to misuse it." And Pastor Greg tells him, "Yeah, he's probably going to misuse it, but I'm going to give it to him anyways because I have the ability to help him, and I'm going to help him." So this whole story is playing out in Pastor Brian's mind as this guy's asking him for a bag of rice. And so Pastor Brian says, instead of me telling him no, because I don't know what you're doing right now with money or with your resources, he asked him, "What else do you need? Is this all you need?" And that the guy told him, "No, I really need a bag of beans and a bottle of oil also, but the store told me that I could only ask one person for one thing. So can you please buy me the rice?" And so Pastor Brian, ends up getting him the beans, getting him the oil, actually ends up getting in a fight with the store because the store said only one thing. But here's the perspective, right? That many times we can see those that are in need and say, "You know what? You don't qualify for me to help you." This is the example that we have in Luke 10 of the Good Samaritan. A man is left for dead. Why? We don't know. Was it his fault? Was it his responsibility? But what we do know is that a priest and a Levi passed by and ignored him. They saw the need and they said, "No, I don't need to help him, or I can excuse myself from helping him." And in verse 33, the Samaritan passes by and has pity on him. The Samaritan was a person that was looked down upon by society. They were the person between the priest and the Levi that had the least spiritual reverence, you could say, or should have been the person with the least conviction. But this was the person that internally had the right perspective. Somebody is in need and I'm going to help them. And this is what God commends in this story. And these are the people that God elevates. Many times we'll look at people and be like, "Wow, God is really blessing them," or "God's really having favor on them." What we don't know is that internally they have the right perspective. The Good Samaritan helped the man in need, took him to an inn, gave money to the innkeeper, told him that he would continue to be responsible for him, and this is the man that was least qualified. And this is the perspective that we should have. that when we see somebody in need, that we shouldn't try to excuse ourselves, but try to help them. This man, the Good Samaritan, simply responded in a time of crisis. I want to talk about the benefit that comes from properly managing the blessing. Pastor Joe Campbell said this: money is a tool for advancing the kingdom of God. That when we properly manage the blessing, not only will we be blessed ourselves, but God can use us to bless His kingdom and for His purposes. I'm not going to get into the story for a lack of time, but if you continue reading the story about Abraham, it'll tell you what happens as the result of his decision to help others and his decision to respond in the time of crisis. Verse 18 of this text, it says that God continued to bless him. It starts off by saying that God gave him victory. The translation or the synonym for victory is success. And I think that's what we're ultimately looking for in the area of our money. Everybody wants to be successful in their financial journey, but they have to respond properly to what God puts in their hands. This past Wednesday, Pastor Amari used the illustration of David Green in Hobby Lobby. I had already had him, David Green, on my target to be used in the Sunday school. And so next week I'm using Truett Cathy from Chick-fil-A, just in case Pastor Amari gets ahead of me. But he talked about how in a time of crisis, the pandemic, he gave more when he was making less or losing money. Why? Because he had the right perspective. David Green has had a lot of experience in properly managing the blessing. And during the pandemic, he's being praised for this, but this hasn't always been Hobby Lobby's story. You have those pictures of those signs. Back in 2014, this is what you were seeing all over the news. The next one. What they were saying is that because of his beliefs, because of his convictions to God, he wasn't going to handle his medical insurance for his employees in a certain way. He could not. And this situation ended up going all the way to the Supreme Court. Show the next one. And so there you have it. It's headlines. Hobby Lobby is going to the Supreme Court to fight for their religious rights. This is back in March of 2014. Thank you. And so he says in his book, Giving It All Away to Get It Back Again, he says that Hobby Lobby has been one of, if not the only, private entity to take the federal government all the way to the Supreme Court and win. But during that time, it was one of the most difficult times because he was losing $1.3 million a day because he was resisting the government that went against his convictions and his beliefs. But he stayed the course. He fought it out. He used his corporation not only to defend his own convictions, but defend the convictions of Christianity. Other companies that have Christian owners were just giving in to the government during this time. And his corporation had to pay millions and millions of dollars over a course of a few years just to defend his rights. It's really interesting. He says this in his book. He says, living generously and faithfully includes obedience to God, even when it's costly. You know, during that time when he's fighting it out, his Hobby Lobby's worth $4 billion. Today, Hobby Lobby's worth $16 billion. So what does that tell us? How we use our resources, how we help others, how we fight for the causes of God will bless us, will give us favor, and will give us victory. Deuteronomy 8:18 says, remember the Lord your God, who has given you the power to be successful in order to fulfill the covenant he confirmed to your ancestors. And so what this is saying is that our resources are linked to a purpose. And so I'm pretty much out of time here. But when our long-term goal is to be successful with our finances, we will manage the blessing properly in our lives. But this is only possible when we understand the true purpose of financial increase. And that's all I have this morning. Thank you.